Everybody watching this video is watching on some form of device, whether it be your cell phone, tablet, or laptop. Perhaps you're one of the 4.7 billion people globally that owns a cell phone. Technology enabled the Industrial Revolution, improving the average quality of life in the developed world. We are now connected more than ever, allowing us to access information and communicate with loved ones at the touch of an app. The benefits are innumerable and clearly a staple to the developed world, but at what cost? You may not have heard of Batu, Mongolia, but the mines and factories here help to keep our modern lives ticking. It is one of the world's largest supplier of rare earth minerals. These elements can be found in everything from magnets and wind turbines and electric car motors to the electronic guts of smartphones and flat-screen TVs. In 2009, China produced 95% of the world's supply of these elements, and it's estimated that the Bayonobo mines, or just north of Batu, contain 70% of the world's reserves. But as we discover, at what cost? Electronic devices are a complex mixture of several hundred materials. A mobile phone, for example, contains 500 to 1,000 components. Many of these contain toxic heavy metals such as lead, mercury, cadmium, and beryllium, as well as nasty chemicals such as brominated flame retardants. Mercury used in lighting devices for flat screen displays can damage the brain and nervous system, particularly during early development. Cadmium used in rechargeable computer batteries, contacts, and switches in older CRTs can bioaccumulate in the environment and is highly toxic, primarily affecting the kidneys and bones. The manufacturing of cell phones and their components generate air pollution both directly and indirectly. The direct pollution relates to the chemicals released during the process of manufacturing, or the components that create the final product. The indirect pollution relates to the inputs necessary for the processes that are not generated in the factory. In order to manufacture the vast number of components, an extraordinary amount of energy is required. The emission released to the atmosphere can cause severe problems to environment and human health. Greenhouse gases are responsible for climate change. In an environment with the natural amount of greenhouse gases, the heat and radiation flows from Earth to space. As a result, the increase of gases reflects heat and radiation back to Earth, increasing the global temperature. For example, according to Apple's environmental reports, the greenhouse emissions of the new iPhone 8 are 45.6 kilograms of CO2. The emissions produced requires 2 trees to absorb the CO2 produced by such iPhones. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the weight of 9 cats, and that's only the production. Planned obsolescence impacts the amount of e-waste produced because it encourages consumerism and the purchase of the newest technology. As such, consumers that do not purchase the newest products are disadvantaged because their technology becomes outdated and unusable. Consider iPhone updates. Older generation iPhones often glitch or lag when updated because their update release is meant for newer generation phones. Obsolescence also discourages any notion of reduce, reuse, and recycle because repairs are often quite costly to consumers. This issue is cyclical because corporations build phones and other electronic devices with the intention of making them outdated rather quickly to encourage future consumption of their updated product. The rapid change in development of technology also means that applications do not work on certain devices. Consider BlackBerry. Companies like WhatsApp and Facebook have ended their application support for older phones like BlackBerry. Inevitably, people using BlackBerries are forced to buy new phones if they wish to use these services. Electronic disposal is a widely misunderstood concept. For example, in Canada, we have an electronic handling fee enforced on the sale of a new electronic device, but they are never really explained or brought to the attention of the public. They allow you to avoid paying a fee upon recycling at the end life of electronics, but the process is quite ambiguous. Some of these programs, including the eSteward program, have rules like no exporting waste to developing nations and no prison labor used in the recycling of electronic waste, but who's tracking? In the United States, 70% of toxic waste is electronic waste. Recycling is a much better option than simply tossing electronics in the trash. The majority of the components and metals can be stripped, reused, resmelted, and remanufactured. Out of all discarded cell phones, only 11% were recycled, while 89% were thrown out in the trash. Each year, 20 to 50 million tons of e-waste is produced. A study in 2017 showed that the amount of e-waste has increased by 63% in the past 5 years. From 2010 to 2015, 13 million tons of electronics were discarded in 12 countries. China accounted for nearly 50%, but it's important to note, however, that 100 tons of e-waste discarded by China belongs to the UK. The e-waste is unregulated and illegally recycled. The process released copper and lead into the air, releasing emissions 155 times than ordinary recycling sites. The effects from lack of environmentally sound e-waste causes altered thyroid function, reduced lung function, birth abnormalities, reduced child growth, mental health discrepancies, impaired cognitive development, and DNA alteration. One common argument that lays at the forefront of the electronics industry is economic expansion. Many argue that our e-waste going to China and regions of Africa are helping small communities because they're using these scraps to develop. It produces employment and allows individuals to scavenge for lucrative metals. It is important to note, however, that only 25% of valuable metals are recovered in the process. Let's not also forget about the toxic carcinogens produced by the primitive techniques of incineration, acid baths, and simply smashing in order to dispose of waste. Not only has our e-waste contributed to high levels of cancer, a lower average lifespan, and dangerously high levels of lead poisoning in children, but also proves detrimental to the economies of developing nations. China has and continues to set disposal precedent for other nations to adopt. Instead of focusing on green forms of development, states are following the Chinese model because it creates many short-term job opportunities. As such, nations become dependent on these practices, resulting in a plateau of advancement. Negating e-waste and developing greener production is no easy task. It involves the cooperation of government, corporations, and the public alike. Education regarding the detriments of getting the newest technology is fundamental to the progression of a more sustainable future. It is apparent we become dependent on electronics, and there's no turning back. However, we need to approach the consumption in a more progressive manner. I leave electronic consumers with one simple question: how important is that bigger screen?